Hey everyone. My name is Megan Hall. I am the admin assistant, project manager, and podcast consultant for Create Captivate. So today I am going to discuss with you about podcast hosting. I know a lot of people are interested in starting a podcast. I've been podcasting for since 2017, so I'm in my fifth year of podcasting right now. And I want to go over like a few quick tips with you in case you are interested in becoming a podcaster as well. So, the first thing I'm always asked is what equipment you need. And that should not be the first question you ask because you need to know so many other things before you actually work on what equipment you need. So, the first few things that you need, one, podcasting is time consuming. If you don't have a team to help you out, it's going to take a while to record, edit, upload all the podcasts that you do. In the very beginning of podcasting, it used to take me 2.5 hours for a 45-minute episode. But now I don't really have to worry about that because I've gotten really good at being able to edit. So now I have it down to less than an hour and a half, which is still a long time. But that includes recording, editing, uploading to my website, creating the show notes. It's a hobby for me, so I don't have a team. I'm not to do that. But number two, you need to know what your podcast is going to be. What is the premise? How long is it going to be? How often are you going to release episodes? Is it going to be a solo podcast? Is it going to be co-hosted? Are you going to have guests? These are all things that you need to have in mind before you even get started. The next is, how are you going to get recognition for your podcast? How are you going to get that out there? Like, is this associated with your business? Is it going to be a standalone thing? Like, what does that look like? And it can go many different ways. And this is actually something we talk about when I do a podcast consult or when you do a podcast consultation with me. Words are not my friend. So the next thing is like, what are you going to use? What hosting platform are you going to use? What's your website? Is it going to be, again, associated with your business? Is it going to be a standalone website? You need to have a hosting platform. What a hosting platform does is it connects between your website and the way to get this out to all the places. So iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, Spotify, and a lot of these places, you're going to have to manually go into it and get approval for your podcast before you can actually push it out to those places. So finally, when you're getting started, you have to keep in mind, podcasts require consistency. If you do not have a super large following, and I'm talking like Brene Brown level following, you have to be consistent in order for people to keep you top of mind. That means if you're doing it bi-weekly, which bi-weekly is the bare minimum I think people need to do. Because if you're only doing it monthly, people are going to forget. They're just going to forget. Weekly is optimal. And I don't suggest starting out with being more than weekly because you need to get your feet wet on how much effort and how much time this is going to take. But also engagement. How are you going to engage people with your podcast? Like, what does that look like? What topics are they going to be looking for in your podcast? If you don't have a consistent premise behind your podcast, they're going to be like, oh, I don't know why I'm listening to this. If I'm listening to a politics podcast, I expect that 95% of the time they're going to be talking about politics. If I'm listening to a business podcast, again, I'm expecting 95% of the time they're going to be talking about business. Stats. People get so wound up in the very beginning of starting a podcast about stats and growing their audience and, oh my gosh, I need to do this so quickly. It takes time to grow a podcast. It takes a lot of time. A lot of people quit. A lot of podcasters quit in the first year. And I would say, I think it is like 50% of podcasters quit in the first year and 75% quit by the second year. And then those of us that have been around for a long time, we're ahead of the game because people are starting podcasts all the time. So it's important to know, like, it's going to take some hard work. It's going to take some consistency. And it's really important that you know how to do all of these things before you get started. So now to the equipment question, which is the one everybody asks. You need to have headphones, because if you don't have headphones, there's going to be an echo. Right now, I don't have my microphone hooked up. I don't have my headphones on. It may be a little echoey in here. You are going to want a microphone, a good microphone. A lot of podcasters have ones that aren't, like, don't sit on the desk. So if you hit the desk or whatever and you can't hear it, that's great. I am not motivated to invest in a new microphone. I've been using this one, or this type, for 4 years. I actually had the same type but a different one before, but I accidentally broke it. And a pop filter. It's a pop, pop. It's for those kind of noises, so you don't have spittle all over your microphone. And then wherever you are recording your microphone podcast, you're going to want to make sure there's not a lot of echo. I had to put a carpet in this room because it's hardwood floors. I got this cool little guy that helps. My microphone sits in here and it helps prevent the echo. Some podcasters like go all out. They get like all this fun equipment. Again, mine's a hobby. So I don't have all the fancy equipment. Maybe someday I will. But yeah, some have like these like little boards that set up and you can adjust like the different sounds. I always recommend, I do guests. I have podcast guests, and I always tell them, like, please wear headphones, try to be in a room that's not echoey. But people listening to your podcast are more likely to judge you and your sound quality than your guest's sound quality. But for the most part, my guest sound quality is really good. I've only had like a couple where people complained and I just removed them. So I create Captivate. The great thing is we can help you with all of these things. I do podcast consultations, 1 hour and 30-minute ones. I'm dropping the link right in the comment section. So if you want to connect with me, you want to schedule a podcast consultation, I'd be more than happy. I do both podcast consultations for podcast hosting and podcast guesting. And for all of our I have a little sticker. For all of our podcast consultations, we have several guides. We have a guide on more in-depth guide than what I went over today for hosting. We have one for hosting platforms. I went through and did all the research on the different hosting platforms and how much they cost. And you got to know there's going to be a cost to, not just for equipment, to hosting a website. I mean, the cost isn't large depending on how often and how long your podcast episodes are going to do, but I pay like $20 a month, which may not seem like a lot, but you know, when it's a hobby, that's an investment that I put into it. I also invest in a calendar system so my guests can go on and schedule their own interviews and we're not going back and forth, but like, are you free this date and these times? Like, it's just far more easy to have a calendar system. And we use Acuity, actually, both at Create Captivate and for my podcast, we use Acuity. And I have a Zoom account so that I can record. I recommend Zoom for recording if you're going to have guests. Do not use, and I can't even think of the name of it, but it's another one that people use a lot to chat. We tried to use it in the very beginning of the podcast and it just kept cutting out. Zoom is very reliable. And they also give you several different files of recordings. So like they give you an audio file. They give you a file with, like, if you have a chat, like they'll tell you what's in the chat. And then they give you a video file. I don't use the video file. I show up to podcast interviews like, whatever, I'll look whatever I want. We also have guides for pitching podcasts and best tips for podcast guesting. So all these fun little things. Also, like Create Captivate can help you build your website, build your social media, come up with your graphics, come up with your logo, come up with all these identifying things because you want people to be able to identify your podcast. You want it to be streamlined. So, a certain graphic that identifies your podcast, a certain logo that identifies your podcast, all of these things, and there's so many nuances because if you want it associated with your business, that's going to be different than if you want it to be on its own. When I started my podcast, I had a coaching business, but I had also had a co-host in the beginning of the podcast, so we made it its own thing. We made it its own thing. It's separate. It was separate from my business, and I no longer do the business because I'm not a good entrepreneur. But anyways, those are the things that you're really going to need. But what you really need to know is that it's going to be time consuming unless you pay somebody to do the things like editing and scheduling and all of those things. It also requires consistency, and it's going to take time to build a podcast audience. It's not going to be like that. A lot of the people, when you go to their podcast and you see like hundreds, if not thousands of reviews, that is because they already had a built up audience before they started their podcast. If you don't already have a built up audience, then chances are it's going to be a lot slower. And that's okay. And if you want to make money off podcasting, that's absolutely possible, but it requires building an audience first before you can get advertisers, but it's possible to get advertisers as well. Again, mine's a hobby, so I'm not doing that. I did have a few advertisers at one point in time. So there's so many different, there's so many different avenues for podcasts, and it's really great. People love podcasts because they can listen to them on their commute, while they're making dinner, while they're, exercising. There's so many different avenues for podcasting. So it's a really great thing to get into. And you might think, well, there's already 1,000 podcasts. Why would I get into it? Well, that's because you're unique. You have a unique perspective. You have something to offer the world. Obviously, if you're listening, you have something to offer the world. And so it's no big deal. Get into it. Try it. Get your feet wet. But commit to at least a year. You owe that to your audience. Not to just be like, bye, I've been doing this for 2 months, but I'm out. So just know that, it's a commitment, but it's a great commitment. You can see a lot of returns. I have connected with the most amazing women because of my podcast. I absolutely have. I'm very fortunate to have connected with all these women because of my podcast. So just know podcasts are great, and they're a great avenue to build an audience. They're a great avenue to educate people, to inspire people, but it does take, again, time, effort, consistency, and we can help you with all those things at Create Captivate. I can't stress that enough. So I hope you guys have an absolutely fabulous day. Again, I dropped in the comment section if you want to schedule a podcast consult with me. I do them both for if you're wanting to start a podcast and if you want to be a guest. All right. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.